All right, Advanced Bio students, we're on to our next lecture video. In our last lecture video, we talked about some of the principles of ecology, levels of organization, food webs and food chains, and how different organisms interact with each other. For this next lecture video, we're going to be talking about the system aspect of ecosystems. How do things cycle through this system? It's not just a collection of organisms, but they're interacting processes that affect them as well. Parts of the abiotic environment, non-living parts of the environment that affect survival as well. So with that in mind, we're going to be talking about the cycling of matter. Now we know that matter is anything that has mass and takes up space. And we're going to be talking about several forms of matter that cycle through ecosystems. The first type of matter that we'll be looking at is the water cycle, or H2O as matter. So water has to cycle through the environment. Water is a critical compound, all living things need it. But the water cycle is also known as the hydrologic cycle. And this is a circular pathway of water on Earth. It involves some of the processes that you see in the diagram to the left, such as evaporation, waterfall, and so on. There's a lot more to it than that, but that's as in depth as we really need to go with this topic. But water does flow from the atmosphere to the surface, below ground, and then back, and involves humans and other organisms. Human impact has definitely changed this cycle. We know that in California we have a massive drought and an issue with water shortage, and this does have to do with our use of this water and interrupting this cycle. Elements that are essential for life also cycle through ecosystems. So not water's a compound, but elements are singular types of atoms. So for example, oxygen or hydrogen. And these are what we call biogeochemical cycles. And this is the movement of a particular chemical through the biological or living and the geological, think Earth, parts of an ecosystem. So for example, the oxygen cycle uses photosynthesis and cellular respiration. We know that we breathe in oxygen and we release carbon dioxide. So this oxygen is part of that process. The oxygen we breathe in is a product of photosynthesis, and the carbon dioxide that we breathe out is a waste product of cellular respiration. When our body and when other living things' bodies do work, they produce carbon dioxide as a waste. And that carbon dioxide then cycles to plants, which then utilize carbon dioxide to then convert that to usable sugars and oxygen. And so the cycle repeats itself. The carbon cycle is also connected to this. This is the flow of carbon through the environment. And carbon is very essential. We learned about this in chemistry. Carbon can form 4 covalent bonds, and it can form long branching chains and things like that. So it's a really important atom for creating organic compounds, which are, really really large compounds such as carbohydrates, proteins, fats. They all depend on carbon as well as hydrogen and oxygen. And so carbon also cycles from the atmosphere into the soil and things like that through processes of, again, cellular respiration and photosynthesis. The simplest transfer occurs between plants and animals. So plants undergo photosynthesis. They take carbon dioxide. You can see this right here cycling. So here's carbon dioxide at the top of our chart. Carbon dioxide is picked up by plants, and through photosynthesis, this is converted into food nutrients, so glucose, which then herbivores and then omnivores and carnivores then consume this through food chains and food webs. Okay? As we consume these carbon-based compounds, things like glucose and, again, fats and other carbohydrates and proteins all build in this carbon as well. Then as we consume this, we use it to do work, and to live requires energy. So this food is broken down for energy, but then carbon dioxide is released as a waste as part of cellular respiration. Okay? And so that travels back into the atmosphere itself. Additionally, when living things produce waste materials or they die, that organic material breaks down in the soil through biodegradation, which produces carbon dioxide as well, which again the plants will then use and convert into food nutrients. So nothing is wasted. Nature is very resourceful. Everything that we put in is used for something. It's when humans interrupt this cycle that we see issues, but there isn't any waste in nature. The nitrogen cycle converts nitrogen gas in the atmosphere into compounds that living things can utilize. So, nitrogen that's found in the atmosphere is not usable to us. So, there's a lot of processes involved here. Um, there are nitrifying algae, there are what we call nitrogen fixing bacteria, and different types of organisms like that that will take this nitrogen that we can't use. So think algae and bacteria can take this unusable nitrogen and change that into a nitrogen that is usable for us. And so this ultimately leads to proteins, like plant proteins, which then again, herbivores will eat the plants and consume that plant protein. And then through time and through food chains and food webs, this nitrogen is consumed, broken down, reassembled, and so on until it forms the proteins that we consume and need. So two major processes that are happening in the nitrogen cycle are nitrogen fixation and denitrifying bacteria. Well, denitrifying bacteria is an organism, but denitrification is what they do. So nitrogen fixation converts gaseous nitrogen, which is N2. This is the kind of gas that we see floating around as part of the mixture of the air we breathe in, and it gets converted into ammonia, NH3, and this is used by certain bacteria. Okay. Denitrifying bacteria convert nitrogen compounds back into nitrogen gas. So these are the major things that are at work here. Bacteria are really important in the nitrogen cycle. The phosphorus cycle returns phosphorus to the environment. So phosphorus is a limiting factor for plant growth. They need this. So we see this in weathering of phosphate from rocks and things like that. There's a lot of phosphorus in geological material. And basically, when you have water run off of rocks and things like that, phosphorus will be chipped away as water runs off of that. And so it ends up in solution in the water itself. Which then makes its way ultimately into soil where plants utilize it, which then gets eaten by other organisms. And this also is a cycling type of element. Okay, there's a lot more to it than this, but just know that phosphorus is something else that is cycling through the environment, particularly from rocks and geological formations through the water into soil and then ultimately to plants and animals. So that's really the depth that I want you guys to know about biogeochemical cycles as well as the hydrological cycles. But now we're going to talk about some other models that we can use in ecology, pyramid models. So an energy pyramid shows the distribution of energy among trophic levels. And if we remember trophic levels, these are feeding steps, or think of it like a food chain, but in the format of a pyramid. It shows where is the energy concentrated and how does it change as it flows from one level to the next. So ultimately, the ultimate source of energy is from sunlight. So ecosystems have to get energy from sunlight, either directly, as in the case of plants, or indirectly, as in the organisms that consume the plants that have used that sunlight energy to form glucose and other sugars. So some energy is lost along the way as heat. So when an animal consumes a plant, and it doesn't get 100% of that energy to do work. Basically, your body temperature is what it is. It's because when you consume food, you give off heat energy as well. Now, this heat energy isn't completely lost because we need that higher body temperature to survive. So it's not completely lost, but we do produce heat and it is lost to the environment. So the energy isn't 100% conserved. So the loss of available energy, how does this happen? So energy is used for many purposes such as movement and growth. So every time you do some type of physical activity, or especially when you're younger, you're going through a lot of growth, your body is very inefficient in using that energy. So the food, you do get energy from your food, but there's actually a lot more energy in the food than we actually get from it. So unused material is excreted as waste. This is through fecal material, but then also the carbon dioxide you breathe out and things like that. Now, biomass is a measure of total dry mass of organisms in a given area. So when a consumer eats a producer, a great deal of energy is lost in the process as heat and waste. And only 10% of energy is transferred at each trophic level. So if you had, let's say, 100% energy in the form of our producers, I'm going to refer to this little diagram over here. You'll notice the base of our pyramid is the largest piece of it, and that is our producers. These are our plants and photosynthesizing organisms. So they get their energy directly from chemical, light or chemical energy. They have 100% of this energy. When an herbivore consumes a producer, it only retrieves 10% of that energy. Okay. And when an omnivore or a carnivore eats that herbivore, they only receive 10% of that, of what energy is available there. So from our original 100% of energy, the second level consumer, our secondary consumers, are only receiving 1% of the original energy that was available. And this continues as you go up your energy pyramid. So an energy pyramid is a diagram that compares energy that is used by each trophic level. Again, the base is made up of producers, and the energy is lost to each succeeding trophic level. So I just showed you 100% to 10% to 1%, but this will continue on. Now, the reason why you lose so much of this is again because of waste and energy lost as heat to the environment. Other pyramid models illustrate an ecosystem's biomass and distribution of organisms. So a biomass pyramid is a diagram comparing biomass. So this doesn't have to do as much with energy, but as the actual weight of living material. So think mass, you were comfortable with this unit of measurement. So mass, you use grams. When you're using scientifically, we don't really use pounds and things like that in chemistry and biology, but we look at grams of biomass. So mass is a form of weight, but bio refers to living, so it's living weight, living mass. And so just like 100% of our energy was consumed, it was made up of with our producers, the largest amount of biomass will be in the producers, because 500 grams of chicken require a lot of grams of grain to be able to operate and function. Okay, and as you go higher up the trophic levels, there's going to be less overall biomass. So the largest amount of biomass you find in lower level organisms, meaning farther back on food chains. So that would be producers, and then after that, lower level herbivores such as insects and things like that. We can also use a pyramid of numbers. This shows the numbers of individual organisms. So this doesn't look at weight or mass using grams, we're just looking at individual organisms. Both types of pyramids may occur in an inverted or upside down formation. And so, for example, you could have a pyramid of numbers based on a single tree and look at the organisms that that supports. All right, stay tuned for our next lecture video. We will be moving on to population ecology after this.